Meeting for September 13th, 2017. Call to order. Jim Jacks is not here tonight, and I also received a email from Jerry Crane indicating that he is resigning from the commission effectively. So that opens up two possible positions, because I think Jim's position is also.
That's been filled.
Okay, that one's been filled. So we have another new position. I'd like to go on record for thanking Jerry for his service to Kaiser and volunteering for various things that he has done in Kaiser. So with regret, I do accept his resignation, because he had children to take care of, and that's always a higher priority, so I admire that. Moving on. Approval of the minutes from our August 2017 meeting. Do I have a motion? Or
Move approval of the minutes.
do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any changes? Okay. All in favor of the minutes of the August 9th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting as written, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving right on. At this point in the Planning Commission agenda is appearance of interested citizens. This is a time that we set aside available for those who wish to speak about an issue that is not on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody that fits that category? With that, I am going to open, I guess it's still open, to continue the public hearing on the text amendment, section 2.308 signs. Staff?
This time I'll start, and Shane can carry the load. So as you know, we continued the hearing last time, and to continue to discuss and research the issues at hand. As part of that research, we have distilled all of the significant changes to the table that you each have. And on it, there are, let's see, 2, 3, 6, 8 issues that we really need the commission to give us specific direction on. We are uncomfortable proceeding. As you know, we have wrestled with this. We have stressed about this. We have gone back and forth. I've driven Shane, I think, to the point of exasperation. Just as we settle on a recommendation, I wake up in the middle of the night with concerns about the intent and the purpose of the sign code as it was originally envisioned, and how do we maintain that and yet stay current and try to address the specific needs that you have heard in your testimony and that I imagine you'll hear again tonight. And it has been no easy task. And so what we have on this table, we have the old text, what the old provision was. We have the proposed text, and what we believe the potential impact of that change would be in our sign provision. Now remember, our sign code goes back to a significant part of our history. It's a significant part of every jurisdiction, and every single jurisdiction wrestles with their sign code. With the Supreme Court decision in the Reed versus the town of Gilbert, it forced everybody to say, wait, what? And that's the process that has initiated what we're looking at. So with this, what we would like to do tonight is go through these 8 bullet points and get your specific direction on, and I would, honestly, I would like at least a consensus, an official consensus on each of these points before we move forward. Now, you know, however you choose to do that, but we need direction from the council. Again, remember the sign code was established and it specifically prohibited individual attention-getting devices such as animation, rotation, waving, blinking, flashing. All of that was very crucial to the structure of our first code. So with that in mind, that's how we are trying to proceed cautiously and move forward. So with that, I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, how you would like to do it. Do you want us to go through these 8? But I think you might want to take testimony before we go through each of those individual 8.
I think probably best I want to hear from the people out there. I have 4 people tonight listed that would like to speak. Generally, if we have a number of people, we try to keep it to a time limit. But I'm not going to really hold the time limit since there's a limited number, long as you keep in mind that we want to go through these points and not take too long in your testimony. So the first person I have is somebody that's well known to us, Jonathan Thompson, who, Jonathan, there's an opening on the...
You're talking to the wrong person in my house about that problem.
Okay. Is the mic on?
Yeah.
Yes, good.
Good evening, Chair Sangster and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Jonathan Thompson. I live here in Kaiser. My wife and I own a local business. I'm also a member of the Kaiser Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and chair their Government Affairs Committee. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Kaiser Chamber. I testified before you last month about these changes, and I won't repeat all of that, but just to summarize that the Chamber agrees with most of where things are headed. We do, however, want to see the electronic sign frequency, change frequency lowered to the national standard of 8 seconds. Today I took a drive around town with my stopwatch and looked at some existing electronic signs. The one by McNary High School is fairly close to my house. That one with trees coming from one direction and a bend in the road going the other, that one's hard to see for an entire 8 seconds. Dairy Queen, again, with the bend in the road and the hill, it's hard to see for an entire 8 seconds. And then the same with Party Mart and the chiropractor there by Taco Bell with other signs and with trees and things. It would be, like I said, difficult to see that cycle too many times in an 8 seconds. I drove from Chemawa and River Road, and I happened to hit the light. So heading south at 35 miles an hour, I was down past Dutch Brothers by the time 8 seconds clicked in. And according to Google, since I was driving when I got back to the office, it looks like I went past in those 8 seconds about 7 individual business lots there on the west side of the road. So made it pretty far down in 8 seconds. I know there's been some concern about signs flashing everywhere and turning River Road or Kaiser Station into a Vegas casino. I'm not all that concerned about. I don't think that'll happen because I think that businesses, if they change their signs too much, it's going to be a self-defeating purpose. But although having a Bellagio on River Road might be fun because I like the buffet. So, but one last item. These electronic reader boards, in addition to being marketing for the business that uses them, they're also a community resource. As we've talked about, the Kaiser Police went up and down River Road asking folks to change their message boards for the Kaiser Police funding meeting that happened earlier this year, and it would be a lot easier to comply with that if it could be mixed in with messages that for your business more than every 15 minutes. So. We would ask you to move these proposed changes with the city council, but ask for an 8-second frequency change. And then, just on a personal note, not speaking for the Kaiser Chamber at this time, but putting on my former campaign staff hat, The election sign one is a big problem, because it's one of those free speech issues that gets tangled. But this is again me just speaking personally. The suggestion from staff to, around an election, allow more temporary signs seems to me to get at that problem of allowing people to support more than one candidate or measure, but at the same time not not restricting, free speech rights. But at the same time, if you allow it for just a period of time around an election, I know there are some towns before Reed Gilbert that I ran races in that allowed it from Labor Day until Election Day or shortly thereafter. You could have campaign signs up, and it was very content neutral. So, I mean, if that might be a way to allow, if you just did that for a time frame to allow more temporary signs. I'm just speaking for my own business. I don't think I would go have a bunch of dental office signs printed that I could put up for 2 months every 2 years. So I think I think that's a great way to tackle that. So anyway, thank you for your time, and if there's any questions I can answer, I'd be happy to.
I'm looking this way and then looking this way. Any questions? Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you for your time.
The next person, Carlos Soto, excuse me.
Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. Carlos Soto. I own a business on River Road called CSD Finding Fitness, and I'm also the treasurer for the Chamber of Commerce. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about the electronic sign change code that's coming along. I know that the businesses of all sizes use types of these on-premise signs to communicate with their customers. I'm one of them along River Road. And I've been doing a lot of research, and it has been suggested that on-premise signs and the regulations that limit these signs, and the case in point are one that we have right now with the 15-minute one and then the proposed of the 60-second one, can significantly impact the performance of some of our businesses on River Road. And so the implication of the research that I've been doing shows that on-premise signage indirectly influences the vitality of the community and the quality of life of consumers by providing information about the availability of goods and services that most of us provide on River Road. My business is a little bit different because even though my sign's on River Road, you have to go back into, and there's several businesses off there that people just don't see, and they try to Google it, they try to find it, and they call me and they said, hey, I don't see where you're at. And my sign, even though when we looked at it, my sign is down below and there's another sign up on top. So that's kind of why I've been getting involved in it, because I have wanted to go digital and be able to have different messages being flashed across with some of the services I offer. So also the research that I've been doing has shown that when businesses have switched to the national standard of the 8 seconds, they're associated with increase of revenues and profits, and this is not here, but I've been doing kind of a lot of research all over for that. And then, given the economic importance of signs, regulations should balance community objectives and surrounding communities like Stayton and Salem. Stayton and Salem are just two of the ones who follow the national standard of the 8-second change rate code. So it's important for business, and it's the impact of the community on a tax base, and it also ultimately leads to the availability of greater fiscal resources to provide community services rendered. So I'm one of those ones who provide a professional service to a lot of our citizens in the community, and I'm in favor of pushing forward with the 8-second change rate for our digital signs.
Thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Whalen.
Thanks. Carlos, I have a question, and I appreciate the research you've done, and that's valuable information. But what was the source of the research? Was it from the sign industry? Was it from a neutral kind of third-party provider, or was it?
Neutral third party, and it was some of the stuff was taken from Cincinnati, Ohio University. So, yeah.
So it was a university study, so to speak?
University study, so to speak, that was a neutral, and I have tons of stuff that I've been going over since we first sat down and we knew that this was gonna change.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Jacks.
The neutral study from a university, what, do you remember which one?
Cincinnati,
University of Cincinnati, was that study funded entirely by the sign industry? Or was it funded entirely by the university out of general funds or something because they had an inquiring mind and needed to know?
sure. I did not really get into finding out if they were funded by a sign company. The research on just some of that I read, I was going through multiple stuff, or multiple articles, and they seemed to be third party and weren't trying to favor any particular people who are trying to go proponent or against it.
Oh, okay. My question is a clarification of what you said, so I heard. Salem and Staten have 8 seconds?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Anything? Commissioner DeBlasi?
So in Salem, is that uniform through the whole town, or do they have parts of town that might have different ones?
It's uniform through the whole town.
Okay.
Yep. And it's up to the person who owns the sign to be able to change, just if they want the 8 seconds, they can do the 8 seconds. If they want a little bit longer, I'm sure they can do a little bit longer.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next person I have up is Jean Lowry. Good evening.
Good evening. This is my first time doing anything like this, so I'm a little nervous.
We're not.
You won't
mean.
bite? My name is Jane Lowry, and I'm the branch manager at the Willamette Valley Bank. I would like to ask a question of you guys, is do you know where Willamette Valley Bank is in Kaiser?
Probably the one next to US Bank?
So we're by Jack in the Box by Avamere. We've
Yeah.
been located for 10 years in Kaiser. We have the reader board out front. And so one of my big challenges is trying to get people to recognize we're out here, that we are a community bank. And it would be very helpful if the sign wasn't having to change every 15 minutes. We do a lot of promoting for the high school. Excuse me, for the high school. We do
Thank you so much for doing that, by the way.
we love to promote for the high school. We promote for any of the auction, sometimes the auction dinners and things like that. We do a whole bunch of the community promoting out there, and it'd be nice to be able to get even more of that on the signs. And I feel like you could do that more if the sign was changing more often than 15 minutes. My marketing guy will ask me to see how it looks. I mean, if I realistically were to sit out, I would literally have to sit out there for over 2 hours to see every sign change because of it being every 15 minutes. So I think there would be a lot of benefit to that sign being able to change more often than 15 minutes.
By any chance, did your sign staff suggest any particular time sequence? We've heard 8 seconds, and staff is suggesting 60.
I'm
Definitely, we're not.
personally not, haven't looked into all the, like Carlos had all the statistics. I just know in my heart, it would be a lot better, probably even from 8 seconds to a minute would be good, somewhere in there, so. And that would give the opportunity to put more stuff on there, I think.
Any questions from the commission? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for advertising McNary. Carlos Pineda?
Good evening. My name is Carlos Pineda. I'm the owner of El Patron Mexican Grill here in Kaiser, and I'm on the board of directors for the Kaiser Chamber. And kind of nervous too, so.
Don't worry.
So I'm at the Kaiser Village where Goodwill is at, and there's 15 plus locations there. And we have, I can't afford a digital sign, but if we were to convince the owner to put one up there, I mean, it'd be coming out of our pockets anyway, right? And I think that having 15 businesses there is just every 15 minutes, it's not worth me paying all that money to advertise out there. My sign right now is about this big, and when people drive down 30, 35, 40 miles an hour, you can't see it. And it says El Patron. That can be a clothing line, that can be anything. They don't know it's a Mexican restaurant there, right? So I'm in favor of the 8 seconds, and I think that if Salem, because it's Salem Kaiser pretty much for everything, right? We're like the little town, but I think that River
We're
Road.
the gateway to Salem.
Right. Well, that's right. But River Road becomes commercial one way. It becomes Broadway the other way. And then Cherry becomes Salem as well. It just divides by Salem Parkway. And if they're at 8 seconds, I don't see why when you cross Salem Parkway, we should be different. So I think, in my opinion, that 8 seconds makes sense to me. I also, I've been there 2.5 years in my location, and for a year and a half, I had an A-frame sign out by the road because nobody knew I was there, and I still get new customers, weekly that live here in Kaiser, have no clue I've been there for 2.5 years, and it was out there for a year and a half, and then other businesses started putting their signs out there, and then it got taken away, because that space is weird. The walkway, the sidewalk kind of goes in a little bit, so where our sign is at, it's actually public property, right? And so it got taken away, and it has affected my business, honestly, because that was the only sign out there that said there was Mexican food there. And because that center is turned around sideways and it's not facing River Road, it's just really hard to get people to know that I'm there. I have new customers that come in that go to the gym 3 times a week and have no clue I've been there for 2.5 years. And I'm literally 2 locations over next to the gym or Goodwill, So, it's just hard being a small business, a struggling small business, to kind of be visible, especially with a little sign and not being able to put an A-frame sign out there, because if I put it on our side, you can't see it. It's 10 feet in from the road. People they don't drive looking around, so that just makes it very difficult. So I think if we were to change it to 8 seconds and hopefully we can get our owner to get us a digital sign, that would be really, really good for my business and other struggling businesses in that center as well.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the commissioners? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving to my left.
Thank you, Chair Sangster. So yeah, if you guys want to walk through the chart, we can kind of look at the categories. What we tried to do, as Nate said, we tried to distill down the major issues, the impacts we see, and kind of some options that you could consider. Ultimately, you can see from our recommendation, we realized after last meeting that it may be too great a task to achieve a recommendation to go straight to council. Maybe not. Maybe you guys are ready to do that. But kind of our envisionment would be that you could give us some direction. We could take it back and we can grind out some new language and set it for a new meeting where we can have true kind of the wordsmithing process that we do. Yeah, after the public hearing is all closed and whatnot. So if we want to look at our charts, kind of that first issue right off the top is the amortization and the non-conforming language proposed change. As we pointed out at the last month's meeting, essentially we've had some language in our code that's very out of date for amortization and bringing signs into compliance. The language that's as proposed from last month's meeting, same language, we didn't tweak it at all. It would create a scenario which would essentially eliminate that language and turn any signs that are non-conforming into just that, non-conforming signs that would be able to be allowed to remain until which a time that they needed to be repaired or they needed any permits. So only face changes would be allowed for those signs. But essentially, if there's a non-conforming sign out there, what we're saying is it could stay. Obviously, the impact to that is that it would allow existing non-compliant signs to remain. And it limits the city's enforcement options. Currently, we would have the option of kind of going after those illegal signs. Whether or not that's been done or not is, regardless of that point. And the options that we'd like really you guys to weigh in on, and ultimately this is the only one in the chart that staff actually has a fairly strong recommendation on. That recommendation is to defer to Shannon, our legal department. But basically the way we see it is the options would be to hear from you guys if you have strong feelings about maintaining amortization language as a general rule of thumb to leave our options open for enforcement, or to, and that would obviously require some updating of the timelines that are listed and all of that, or going with the recommended language approach, which is essentially to say, okay, we've got these handful of non-conforming signs around town. Nobody seems to be complaining about them too much. Let it go as it is. And then we ultimately defer to Shannon because he's got some legal concerns.
There's just one slight additional point in that proposed language that we have. We also have indicated that even a structural repair, the word is just repair, but the intent is a structural repair is also prohibited unless they bring it into compliance. So the intent is at some point these things are going to have to be repaired, and at that point we're saying bring it into conformance. Now again, that's what the current proposal is. I think we may need to wordsmith that repair concept, but that's the current proposal for you. But again, all of this is dependent upon our, and I'll let Shannon speak for himself, his concerns about if we simply make it non-conforming, that means basically it would kind of take on a legal non-conforming status. And I'll let him explain further.
Well, I've frankly been too tied up with some time pressure things to get too deeply into the amortization issue. And because we had other issues, the three of us met about a week ago and thought process-wise, we need to kind of take a step back and I mean, we want you to go through these issues, but regardless of where you want to go there, we want to take some time, and that's why we're suggesting closing the hearing. And we may not be bringing it back to you next meeting, maybe the month after or whatever. I think we need to do a little more in-depth work on it. To the non-conforming, non-compliance, just so we have the nomenclature down. Non-compliant means non-compliant, or we'll just be real blunt and say illegal. Non-conforming typically means legally non-conforming. So when a house is a typical example is if you have a zone that is residential and there's a house in it, and then it's rezoned to commercial, let's say. Well, you can still live in that house. That's a legal non-conforming use, and there's a section at the end of the code that talks about general non-conforming uses. Signs are different, and signs typically have an amortization period. When we adopted it in 1990, we had for permanent signs a 7-year amortization, which was up 20 years ago. So there's a few signs, notably billboards, around. Many billboards went away through various means that we can thank Chris and Nate for, and just general father time, because people came in and said, well, we need to fix this sign, and we said, well, I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to take the sign down. You can't fix the structure. Okay. But we didn't pursue for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the litigious nature of the billboard companies. And there's some other signs that aren't billboards too. So with that background, I'm kind of reluctant to say right now the best option would be to just say, well, if you've been here this long and we haven't enforced against you, we'll just let you go. And when you eventually have to repair that sign because it's falling down, then we have to do that and not preserve the enforcement action. And part of it is not really a legal issue, and so I'll leave it to you and ultimately council. It's more of a policy issue, and I guess I look at it this way. In a way, it's a little bit of a fairness issue. The people who did complied and spent a lot of money and put the signs, but the people who didn't would now be let off the hook, theoretically. The flip side to look at it, and this is the way Shane has put it, is, well, if you haven't enforced it by now, are you really going to enforce it, I guess? So I'm not giving you a lot of answers. Those are my general comments. I think I'm going to want to look at this issue a little harder. But from a legal point of view, in terms of where that puts us in the future in terms of enforcing or not enforcing it. But I think staff would, if you want to consider this issue and give us some guidance into what you think, we can take that into account when we get into it a little deeper.
All right. So, and I would just add on the tail end of that, this would be like one of the subjects that staff doesn't have a lot of heartburn about it one way or the other. We're pretty comfortable trusting Shannon coming back with something that's going to make sense. And so the second thing on the list, which we heard testimony on.
Let's see if they have any comments on it.
Yeah, do you guys have any questions on that, or go ahead?
I just had a comment. I agreed with Shannon that it seems unfair to the businesses that went through the whole process. And, a date to date, sometimes things don't get enforced. Not everyone gets a ticket when they're driving 40 on River Road, but that doesn't mean it won't ever happen. So I think we should update the dates, but I think otherwise leave it as it is.
Just my initial thought, well, not initial, going back to last month's meeting, is that we should retain the amortization program, and if the city attorney wants to or needs to do some additional research to see kind of what the latest legal field is regarding enforcing amortization programs, then that would be good.
Commissioner Whalen.
Thank you. Couple of questions. One is, can we move through the other items on that page and maybe come to some sort of resolution? Maybe we won't enact them, but we can address a lot of these other ideas so kind of where we individually or collectively might be. And then wait for, I think it's appropriate to make sure that the community has tools that are either supportable or enforceable or any combination of, and we need Shannon's input to do that. So I have no angst with waiting on that.
I kind of agree because we want to be fair. That's the key. I think that's what Michael was alluding to. We want to be fair to everybody, even the people that had the signs, because most of them put them in before the city became a city. So, Commissioner Whalen.
And along those same lines, and like Michael was talking, has there ever been an enforcement for an illegal or non-compliant or whatever terminology you want to be?
Many years ago.
Okay.
I mean, it didn't go very far. We managed to
Negotiate something?
get some stuff done. And I think I remember mentioning to you folks, we had the carrot and the stick. The urban renewal program paid 50% of the costs if you did it by a certain date. That solved a lot of problems, because on one hand, we were warning them, when this date comes, you not only will be enforced against, but you'll lose 50%. So we got huge compliance over that 2-year period. I don't know what period of time, more than 2 years probably. And there was only a few after that, and then we were able to work them through. And like I say, the billboards were just sort of by attrition, if you will.
Because many of these enforcement issues are probably complaint driven, just like a helmet, or like Michael saying driving 40 in a 35, you know, it happens, because you can't enforce everything. We don't have the staff and the man-hours to do that. But when it is enforced, is there an ordinance or something that addresses penalties, fines, compliance?
Sorry, specific to the sign, basically it would fall under our general complaint and,
A non-compliant sign, for
Right.
example, or an
Regular
illegal sign,
municipal
there
code
is.
violation,
Yeah,
up to $500 per day,
okay,
maximum.
all right. And I don't want to just throw some of that encouragement / enforcement out. I think it's a tool that benefits maybe the look of the community, but also in fairness to the other businesses who have taken the responsibility to be compliant. I think that's a way to support that. If we take that away, we're telling the next person, well, you can do whatever we want because you didn't do it for Gary or Jim, you know? So, okay, that's,
Commissioner Jacks.
I may not be remembering this correctly, but prior to the current community development director, wasn't there an earlier community development director that on a Saturday was driving through town and saw a structural change being made to a billboard? In effect, they were caught red-handed and they had to take the
I happened
billboard
to,
down?
I happened to be there that day, and it was odd because it was a Saturday meeting. It was some sort of kind of retreat kind of session for staff, and I think it was Wally Mall, not the community development director, who was. And at that time, I don't know if Wally was a city manager or public works director. Yeah, they did. They were changing it on a Saturday, and they didn't have a building permit from Marion County, so they were red carded and stopped.
Commissioner DeBlasi.
Is there any sign along River Road that they could pull the historic structure? Card?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
are we ready for bullet point number 2?
Yes. This is election signs?
Right, so with election signs, as we're proposing to eliminate the category in order to be in concert with the Reed versus Gilbert decision. Obviously, so, the language currently defines election signs. We allow an unlimited number of portable or temporary signs pertaining to such an election during the period 45 days prior and 7 days after an election. And that's what we've done since, 2006 maybe? Is that about right? I don't know, something like that when we changed it.
Very well.
Sure. So our proposed language will eliminate that category, which clearly, because of eliminating the category, eliminates the ability to have signs. So the problem, the rub is that since no distinction can be made, basically we're saying no additional signs can happen. As staff, we feel like that's probably not going to go over well, like maybe lead balloon status in the community. We had testimony earlier regarding the fact that it feels as though that's infringing on free speech rights. So basically, we see a few options for you guys to consider, and this is where we'd like kind of input so we can craft some language to bring back to you. And essentially, we look at it as this would be an opportunity to do an allowance for unlimited portable signs during an election time frame as you saw fit for that time frame to be, or maybe to specify a certain number during an election time frame, or you could also do a specific number all the time, which would ultimately give more signs, but that would be a way around it. And then, the other option, which would be not in compliance with really the Supreme Court decision, would be to say, no, make no change. We keep our language as is. And then the one thing I did want to point out, I guess theoretically, with some of the language we're proposing for special event permits, we could kind of lead folks who want to go and advertise for all of their candidates, say, hey, you can get this 2-week permit option. Again, I don't know that will go over real great. So that's kind of where we're at with it, and wanting to kind of hear your guys' opinions on what you think is the appropriate thing for our community.
Let me ask a question for Mike. on my property, it's on my property. During the election, there may be several candidates that I'm supporting, both locally, nationally, regionally, maybe some ballot measures. So in theory, I could have 20 signs.
But you could now.
What if I want 25?
You could.
Can, it's not limited.
Okay.
Under the current language. The problem is, the current language specifies they have to pertain to the election. There's the rub. Now, remember, so the staff proposal is we just say, you know what? You eliminate the category, you eliminate the category. I have to take ownership. That was me being bullheaded about the way the Supreme Court issues these decisions without. So that's my editorial comment. I take full responsibility, and we'll just move on from there. Our recommendation would be to allow a specific number. Anything we do here is going to require additional enforcement. Anything you do, there's always going to be 48 candidates on the ballot, and you choose a number, and somebody's going to want more than that. Keep in mind also that because we cannot regulate the content of that sign, an appliance store may choose to blanket the city, and it would become that much of a problem. So this is why, again, this gets to one of the core struggles that we have in this whole issue. You know, election speech is one of those basic, fundamental free speech rights of our citizens. We understand that, but because we cannot categorize them, we cannot read them to enforce them, we are left with somehow to get a handle on it. Now, we've looked at other jurisdictions. Many of them have simply, during that period of the election period, that there is an unlimited number. And a lot of people are living with, a lot of jurisdictions are living with it. You may recommend to do just that. We could choose a number, and I'm just saying what Shane said, so I'll shut up now.
Commissioner DeBlasi?
So, can you clarify, is there a difference when it's commercial versus non-commercial at all?
Do you mean
Does
the zoning?
the allowance of,
You mean on the sign itself?
yeah,
No. You can't distinguish what type of speech is on there, especially in Oregon. So you can't distinguish between, you know, semi-anniversary sale and Smith for mayor.
Oregon.
And that's, I'm sorry, Nate, but that's why of all of the stuff that they're talking about, this and real estate is a little bit less, but this, to me, I objected when this was adopted. To pertain to elections is just plain wrong, and it was wrong way before Reed versus Town of Gilbert. So that part is good. The question, like Nate says, is, okay, what do you do with it there? And just so we're clear, Shane, and it kind of goes in here, really added one more, which is, or maybe I will, you know, basically characterize it. Unlimited during election time frame, specific number during election time frame, limited number or unlimited number anytime. Unlimited number anytime wouldn't work, but you could just break it away from the election frame too and say, you know, like Nate says, there's always going to be somebody that wants one more, but you could pick 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever and say, but any time of year, rather than trying to tie it to an election period, which some people may gripe about. That, wait a minute, how come I have to do my signs at this time of year? I have a message I have a message about whatever I want to give a message about when it's not election time. So, I mean, you could get complaints that way too.
So getting back to your question, Commissioner DeBlasi, most states, if not all states, distinguish between commercial speech and non-commercial speech. Oregon's constitution makes no distinction, and therein is part of our rub. Otherwise, we could have some tools to try to distinguish and separate out in zones and that sort of thing.
So how would the time frame then for election time frame, that would cover anything, right? That would cover Mole's Appliance Store too?
Well,
Let's
one
go
thing I
make
wanted to,
mention.
if I may, I think, and Nate and Shane can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're really talking about non-commercial, basically residential properties, because the commercial properties already have their sign rights. If you're going to do with the elections definition, they have the number of signs, whatever the number of signs are is the number of signs. So, is that?
I would say yes and no. I mean, there's so right now, and this is where the sign code is really tough, and I really
Oh,
tried to
I
keep
am-
the chart distilled
see.
down. I'd rather talk about that honestly when we talk about portable signs, which is another one of the categories on here and the changes we're making. But the short answer is that Shannon is right. If a business wants to advertise their candidate or they want to advertise a special, they can do so with language we're proposing that's going to be specific to a sign type, a sign location, and a sign size. So, but what we're wanting to hear from you all is, because we've had to eliminate this election sign category, we want to see the policy direction from Planning Commission so that we can take something back to you and ultimately to council to say, what is your policy direction for, do we want more than what's already allowed out there for those election windows, or a workaround? Because ultimately, like I said, as I see it, there's an option to say, hey, you can have unlimited signs during that election time frame. It's a little tweak of the words, and probably most people will utilize it for just that, for election signs, but we cannot say that that's all they can use it for. So, yeah, but right now, businesses and residences can put up a portable sign. They've always been able to do that, and they'll continue to be able to do that, but there is a limited number.
Commissioner Whalen?
Shane, I think I just heard you say that we have to eliminate the election sign as a category. That's, might be a recommendation, but that's not literally
Correct.
required, correct?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Yes, the Gilbert Reed decision basically came, I'm not a lawyer, so I won't talk too much about it, but essentially the Gilbert Reed decision was kind of a big decision because of signs being defined by content neutrality. And there's been a few big Supreme Court decisions over the years about content neutrality, and this is kind of the most recent one of it. And having these types of definitions in our code based on that Gilbert Reed decision would basically, and again, I'll let Shannon kind of weigh in there because he's the lawyer, but essentially it makes our code not content neutral on its face, which means it just opens us up for litigation if we were to do enforcement and things. So it's best practices kind of to fix those things accordingly. So yes, so obviously we don't have to, but that was a big part of what drove this amendment, was in response to that Gilbert Reed decision and what other sign codes are doing around the country and within our state and things like that,
Thank
to address that.
Commissioner Jacks?
Well, my, not only planning commission opinion, but my professional opinion as a planner is that our U.S. Supreme Court has done no one in the country any good deed, because what has been going on in a lot of places for a long time is, yeah, you put up some additional signs during a election season, and their message is political in nature. Okay, put them up after the election, take them down. Well, now, and as Shane just mentioned, there's been a few Supreme Court cases that have kind of been going one direction, and this Reed versus Gilbert, City of Gilbert, has even gone farther. And so what I'm thinking we should have as a policy is set up a time frame and allow additional signage, and don't say what that signage must say. Therefore, it's content neutral. And if somebody gets a burr in their bottom about that, whether it's the Oregon chapter of the ACLU or somebody else, then they can file their lawsuit, their intent to file, then they can file the suit, and will be months and months where the city can say, do we think we're going to win this or not? And if we think we're not, then the city can, as often happens or as is not unusual to happen in court cases, the parties agree to have a lapse of the time frames while the city backs off and amends their code. And then at that point, you end up with whatever you end up with. But I think we should not, so to speak, cave in completely, but rather try to have some program where you have additional signage during election season, whatever that period is that we would define, not regulate what the content is. And if somebody does take us to court, we'd say, well, we've been doing this for 5 election cycles. We've never told anyone through enforcement or informally that there are additional signs that comply with our code during the election season are illegal because of its content. We'd have a past practice to defend in court with, and then see how it goes.
So, sorry to jump in, but so Commissioner Jacks, are you recommending a number or unlimited?
Well, it could be a number of signs, or it could be a square footage of signs for each property.
Practical enforcement.
Well, anything's going to have enforcement.
Yeah.
Well, the measuring of the signs is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's,
And we would already limit them in the square footage of the sign is already limited to 6 square feet.
Right.
So I think what we're, yeah. So I think what we're down to, well, there is a formula we could go through, like you're suggesting, a total area. My recommendation, though, would be not to cause a person to get out with a tape measure. So my preference would be that either we choose a specific number that you can have 5 signs, 3 signs, whatever that number is, or that we say that it's unlimited. For a second, I thought you were arguing to just simply leave it as it is. And if somebody challenges, we say, oh, I guess we better change that code. But you were not, that's not what you
Well,
were recommending.
I guess our current has a category of election signs or political signs, and then it has some standards, and
Pertaining to elections.
right, pertaining to elections. So if we removed the signs pertaining to elections title and said signs allowed during
Yeah.
the time frame,
And that's the
whatever it
proposed-
is,
that's what it-
Halloween through New Year's or something, or Halloween through Veterans Day,
Well,
then
know
that
what?
would allow whatever we currently allow during the time Halloween through
they'll
Veterans
have to
Day.
name a day, so whether it's a national holiday like Halloween or an event like, an election, it's still the same. You're still naming an event, you're still creating a time frame. So I am not at all worried that we would say the period 45 days before and whatever we say, 2 weeks after. 7 after. I mean, that's not, it's just the content of pertaining to elections is what the proposal is. The current proposal is that we just simply say it goes away, but we're recommending that was my stubbornness, and we should just walk away from that.
Just as a follow-up on elections, depending on how the process goes, some people, and I'm sure some communities have had this happen to them. Well, let me back up. Some folks are going to say, okay, allowing anything during election season is fine, but then other communities are put through the process of people saying, well, is this only for national elections? Or is this for also elections where there are no national candidates? If the city has some kind of a special election to fill a city council seat, and the election is on one of those other election dates, like in March or September or whenever those are, would we allow signage during those times? And some people say, well, how about the primary in May during the election of national figures? And gee whiz, just because the primary was in May doesn't mean campaigning stops until 6 weeks prior to the November election. What's the problem with leaving up the signs that we put up in May through the summer so that they're there for the November election? And then people say, well, I'm gathering signatures for a ballot measure, and it's 2 years down the road, and I want to have some advertising, political speech about this ballot measure. And so they want to have signage up for 2 years prior to an election. So I don't know if anybody's going to bring all these issues up to us and make us have to go through picking and choosing every little thing, but I think we need to be aware that that could be the result of somebody coming to our public hearings and raising those issues.
My preference, and we didn't get into this detail, is that if you want to define a calendar period, that we define it by a calendar date and not a reference to elections, and that it would be in the fall. And you pick actual days, October 31 to November 15, or whatever it would be. And that way, there's less likelihood of someone indicating that there's a reference to election signs. If you wanted to make it broader, you could. I'm not hung up on that as much as I am the main issue, the main issue being getting rid of the word election pertaining to election. I mean, clearly a content violation. But some, and I don't necessarily agree with this stance, but some people are very conservative in terms of any references to elections specifically is, even though you're not regulating the content, could be a problem. I don't think that that would be necessarily a problem, but it would be nice to have just specific dates. It'd be easier too, but not that much easier. We can count days. Shane has a program that does that on his computer. So.
Commissioner Whalen.
Thank you. Issues like this drive me crazy. It's flies to me in the face of common sense. I mean, as someone who has tried to help candidates place signs, many businesses don't want political signs on their property because they know that anywhere from 30 to 70% of their clients are offended that I would speak for X when they think Y is the only. So many businesses flat don't allow it, regardless of what the law says, okay? I don't think most husbands and/or wives are going to want, 58 signs in their front yard year-round. So I think we ought to leave the thing as it is, the criteria being that we can have the signs. I mean, we're a free country. We can have whatever signs any of us want to and our significant other will agree to within our property, okay? My concern would be that if there are an unlimited number, and I'm fine with that, that there be provisions that, we don't impede vision safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and automobiles. And the rest of it, walk away. Go ahead. Sue if you want to, but go pick something worth fighting about.
Well, so you're suggesting unlimited in number,
Yeah.
is what you're saying?
I see.
During a particular calendar date or during a
During that
particular
time.
period,
I mean, we
election
can pick,
period.
May 1st through May 30th and November 1st through November, whatever that is.
But the
But
trouble on picking a specific date, there are elections sometimes in March. There are some little local things that come up. So
Well, then we can identify when there have been elections. That wouldn't be that hard to do, and pick X amount of days before and X amount of days after. End of discussion. Let people do what they want to do on their property as their rights as citizens of this country. And quit paralyzing ourselves with more legalism.
the way it reads currently is allows unlimited election
sorry.
sites 45 days prior and 7 days after an election, period. Doesn't give any dates or anything. So if we suddenly have a special election by the school district for something in March, 45 days, 7 days after.
Theoretically, yes. We don't define exactly what an election is, I don't believe, in the sign code chapter. So ultimately, when there's ambiguity in the Kaiser Development Code, by the rules of the Kaiser Development Code, when there's ambiguity, then the zoning administrator, who's this guy, he may make interpretations based on historical content, things like that. So honestly, I think for tonight, since we're going to be bringing back language to you guys, I think the most important thing for us to hear would be, are we looking at unlimited? Are we looking at a number? Or are we looking at none? And then let us maybe come to you guys with a proposal for that time frame, and then you can beat us up at the next time.
Right now, I'm kind of following Gary's, let's be common sense and make it simple, and I'm not worried about the word election.
I know we don't want to say the E word,
I'm okay with it, honestly.
but is there a way to do this that's legal where you can have specifically saying during elections you can have an unlimited or up 50 signs. Outside of those periods, you can have 5 signs. You're not saying what's on the content of the signs. You're just saying,
I don't want to, anytime we have a specific number, I think, as we mentioned earlier, at least in my mind, you have to have the ability to enforce. And we don't. And we won't.
Well,
Well, it's,
so going to Commissioner de Blasi's comment, that's what we are proposing, is that if we're just trying to settle on during the elections, however we define that, whether it's a date or simply the word elections, we're just trying to understand, do you want to try to get a hold of it and limit it, or do you want to do the common sense approach, have unlimited number during that period, however we define that? Or do you want to say, no, you're limited to the yard sign that you're allowed right now? And I don't think I haven't heard anybody suggest that we want to, during the election. It would be an enforcement nightmare. So Shane is definitely not recommending that. So it's really, it comes down to, do you want to choose a number, or do you want to say unlimited during this? And then outside of that time period, then the same, it's the rules apply as they're written. That's what we're getting to.
I kind of see unlimited, but
Awesome. So we can move to page 2?
yes.
Yes. Okay, so this one's, it's going to go a little bit faster now, I think, because these are a
downhill.
little easier
It's downhill
topics.
now. It's
I'm hoping.
downhill.
Fingers crossed. So the next one on our list is the real estate signs. And the basic gist of it is currently we allow a real estate sign because we define it by category. So it's advertising the sale, lease, or rental of a property. You are allowed 6 square feet for residential, 16 square feet for commercial. What we are doing with the proposed changes, we get rid of that category, but a real estate sign, by the way they're constructed, it would be considered a portable sign, which in our definitions are going to be allowed at 6 square feet in area. So the only thing by limiting this category that really messes with folks' signage rights is for the commercial real estate properties. Because right now, when we amended the code, I think it was 2006 or 2008, and we established that 16 square feet for commercial real estate signs. With this change, they're no longer going to have that ability outright, but our workaround that we're proposing is through this special occasion permit, the new section we talked about last month. And in that special occasion permit, we crafted some language that basically said a property, so not a business or a storefront, but a property may obtain a special permit for one singular portable sign of up to 16 square feet in area. So that's kind of the workaround. So essentially on those commercial properties that have the ongoing commercial real estate sign for lease, for sale, whatever, they would now under these provisions be required to obtain a permit through our office. That permit would be good for the way we're proposing it, good for 120 days, but they could continually renew it. What we see as an impact for that is clearly, again, 'cause since we're content neutral, if a business wanted to come in and the property owner wanted to get one portable sign of 16 square feet and get a permit for it, they could do that. But it would just be it'd be basically quantification. If they did that, they wouldn't be able to have a real estate sign, or the real estate sign would have to be smaller. So I guess from our end, this one doesn't have a whole lot of options as we see it. We're not giving you a lot of options, but it is kind of a key factor, so we wanted to keep it on the chart. And really the only option would be just don't make a change and kind of keep the category, which ultimately I don't think Shannon's going to let us do in the long run anyhow. So, but we are, open to other suggestions that you guys may have from a policy direction. But personally, I feel like the workaround we've created, it does work to not feel like we're taking away signage rights from our existing code.
The question I have is, might have to ask somebody in the audience too. What kind of complaints have we had from our real estate?
None.
Do
I mean, we generally don't get them through our office. We generally don't have to do much in the way of enforcement. With commercial real estate professionals, there has been times where somebody comes in, has a very large sign, and so we'll call them up and say, hey, we have a limit, here it is, and then they trade out a sign for the appropriate size.
The history of the real estate category is it used to be 32 square feet. And it was basically a conversation with the chamber that said, we don't like it, that it looks like River Road is for sale. And so they were the ones that actually said, can't we reduce the size to 16 square feet? And that was how that came about back in those days. So no, we haven't had a complaint from the real estate industry.
Is there anything from you guys out there?
Haven't really taken a position on that, but when we sent this out to our members, that wasn't something we got any feedback on.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Commissioner Jacks?
Just another comment that the U.S. Supreme Court has, I think, again, with their decisions, done no favors for all the people of the country, because a lot of cities and counties have an allowance for real estate signs, and in most cases it probably works just fine. You don't have to be dominated by every property with a 64 square foot for sale sign, or lease space available, build to suit, and all those kinds of things. But you do allow a certain amount of signage for properties that are for sale or have buildings for lease. So I don't know, other than if we change the name from real estate sign to some other kind of additional signage allowed when a property or a building is for sale. Well, okay, you get extra signs. You don't have to say for sale. You could say McDonald's, 1 block down, turn right. You could say anything you want on it. But you wouldn't be able to get those signs unless the property was for sale or a building on that property had space for lease.
I'm kind of following Jim's thoughts a little bit, but I'm kind of on the no change, but how do we change the term real estate sign?
Or why?
Or why? I mean, I'm kind of, we've had no problems. We have no concerns voiced yet about it. And the real estate industry is pretty good about voicing concerns when there are
Sure.
concerns.
But believe me, Hirsch, I wouldn't be proposing to change that language if it wasn't kind of driven by the categorical exclusions that we feel are appropriate based on that Reed versus Gilbert decision.
I just hate to have a special permit process because in fact that requires more staff time. It's a permit process.
Mhm.
It's going to cause staff time. It's going to require at least a data entry somewhere.
Sure.
And
Well, okay. So the permit process was an effort to try and keep a handle, because otherwise you just simply create a category that people can simply take advantage of. Oh, well, we want one additional sign that's 16 square feet, whatever. That, and Jim, I think if you think about your suggestion closely, you realize you're still creating a category. You're just simply describing it differently.
But that category wouldn't regulate the content. I know Shannon probably doesn't agree with that.
Not necessarily. I mean,
That's kind of true, though.
it may be difficult. I hadn't thought of the option that Jim raises, if I could, Hirsch. Yeah, Shane is right about what I think about this category. I feel not quite as strongly as election signs, but in Oregon, a true Oregonian constitutionalist would say there's no difference between an election and real estate in terms of a designation. It's content driven. It's not content neutral. So any option you choose, my strong recommendation is you drop the real estate definition. I think the choice for you is either something along the lines of staff's recommendation in terms of the permit process. And again, we're only talking about commercial, the larger signs. Some sort of permit driven or some sort of option, as Jim points out, or a third option. I'd strongly recommend against any option that retains the real estate definition. But if you want us to come, and we don't need to talk about wordsmithing now, if you, you're right, I'm not too excited, Jim, but I mean, you could try to work out something, but it'd have to be for lease too, not just for sale. And so that would be an interesting kind of situation on how to exactly determine that. So,
Commissioner DeBlassie.
So Shane, you were talking about, it's good for 120 days and then you renew. So can you imagine a scenario where there'd be a denial? I mean, would you say, okay, well, your building's not for sale anymore,
Well, if there was more than one, for example, per property, or if there were, so we would basically evaluate the conditions that you had to comply with. And if you didn't meet those conditions because it was too big, or there was already one on the property or something like that, it would be denied.
But if someone wanted just to renew their 16 square foot building, and Shane pointed out, I was thinking, well, maybe a time limit or whatever. Well, hey, some of these buildings, usually the lease situations, they go on for a long time, depending on the economy.
Yeah.
And especially if you're looking at a large shopping center,
Yep.
there might be a spot in there for lease for a while. The flip side of it is if you do have a permit system, and we won't get into what the fees would be, we typically don't get into that issue at the Planning Commission, but no one's going to abuse that by paying money they don't have to have, don't have to spend. If they need the sign, they'll get the permit. So we thought that would be a disincentive to just leaving the sign up permanently if they didn't need to.
So the best news I've heard all night is that Shannon can get to a point where he's only mildly uncomfortable with the scenario that Jim has indicated.
I still am trying to figure out exactly how you write that, but I mean, I understand the incentive to not get into a permit situation, but
And if there's a way to do that,
yeah.
I would jump on that. So
And the one thing is,
Can you
I'm
write
just,
before the end of the meeting when you're done?
the one thing I will say about the permit process we are envisioning, at least at a staff level, a very simple permit process with a very low overhead of work. And frankly, having a simple spreadsheet or a database will actually make our enforcement life easier, because instead of having to look and track and keep count of something that's outright allowed by the code, which is currently how it is, you know it's not allowed unless they've received a special approval. So when you see that larger portable sign, any larger portable sign, anything bigger than 6 square foot that's a portable sign, they have to have a permit for it. And so enforcement wise, it'll be very, frankly, easy for us comparatively. So, yes, sir.
So would you have a sticker to put on the sign? Would make it
Quite
easier
quite
for
possibly. So we've looked at a few different options, Kyle. But yeah, that is one way to do it. I think it would probably also be dependent on how many we ended up issuing, because it may be as simple as it's kind of a one-page list of, because again, we're proposing it's one per property, not one per business. So you have a shopping center, there should only be one of the larger signs there. And so, what's that? Yeah. You didn't need to quit. You said you weren't talking anymore. So, but yeah, so I think that we've talked about that. Some cities that have had permitting programs for temporary and portable signs as a whole, a lot of them will use a, kind of like we do for tags on our cars. It's a specified color for a specified year, et cetera, et cetera.
So doesn't city statute say that any fee or permit has to be, the manpower has to be covered for that by, is there something? I'm trying to remember, I thought I heard something
It's
like that.
actually the reverse.
Oh, okay.
And that is state law generally says you can't collect more than it costs you. So it can't be a revenue generator. But there's nothing to say that you can charge less than it costs you. That's a policy decision.
And typically, for example, our land use fees they do not cover our costs. It's a shared responsibility. Some cities actually take full cost burden for permits. We have long maintained that it's a shared benefit. Zoning is a benefit to the community as well as to the individual. Okay. So, but this might be different. Might be full cost.
So I see us maybe siding with a special event permit process. Gary?
I think this is Commissioner Jack's last meeting, but I
Yeah.
think he raised an interesting
Yeah.
point, and I would like to see if Jim would be willing, at least maybe unofficially, to put some thought to that and work with Shannon and see if they can't come up with something that's amenable to all the parties involved. And you could do that after tonight. You could do it clear through the end of the year.
Off the clock.
We can stay till midnight
Yeah.
tonight working on it.
But I mean, if you'd be willing, I think that might benefit us as a community.
Because the way it's written now makes sense to me.
That's the problem. It makes sense.
It's just the word real estate because of the Supreme Court. And,
Okay.
Go ahead, Gary.
I will not repeat my rant. However, part of it goes like, we're fixing something that's not broke.
Broken.
We haven't had an issue, okay? Now, it seems to me that since January, I've heard any number of times that the Supreme Court's coming to an end because now there's a shift of power. So who knows what the Supreme Court may or may not do if it ever goes there. We're protecting ourselves against imaginary obstacles.
Well, there is the Gilbert decision, which is there, but I'm kind of like you, Gary. It's like, who's going to sue us over the word real estate?
Then why are we taking our time with this?
Now that we're talking about it,
I mean, let's just,
Yeah.
we've spent
Yeah.
an hour on two things. And we're still shooting at Ghost.
Yeah.
Can we use emojis?
Jim?
Just to save Shannon from having to say this, it's an issue because the Supreme Court says it's an issue. And it isn't just the Gilbert decision, it's prior decisions that they've made that said, yeah, you can't control content. And so cities and counties all over the country are doing what we're doing and tearing our hair out saying, well, we don't have a particular problem in our city. Right, okay, well, the Supreme Court does. And so that's kind of why I was thinking with the election signs, if we did something and then waited for someone to actually contact the city and say, we don't like what you're doing, and whether it's the Oregon chapter of the ACLU or somebody else, an individual, and then they contact the city and we say, well, yeah, it says that, but we don't regulate the content of the sign. And they say, prove it. And we'll say, we have no enforcement document records of any enforcement on the content of any sign during an election season. And if we kept real estate sign category, we could say, we don't have any enforcement documentation, and you will find nobody in the city who has ever been fined because they had some signs up on their property that, and that the city did not enforce due to content. So we could take that chance, and if somebody does have a problem, then there's quite a process that takes months before it actually gets anywhere. And at that point, the city could say, okay, we agree with you, we think we'd lose on this one, and then it comes back and we really have to knuckle down and take the issue head on.
Or somebody else
Yeah,
does, because
not
you're not going
us.
to be here, Jim. Well, I'd like to move on off of real estate and just, the suggestion was to see if we could come up with some words.
Some words outside of a permit process is what you're suggesting.
I just don't like to create, I know Shane is talking about making it simple, but it's still staff time.
Well,
It's-
no matter which way you turn.
Yeah, on the issue of staff time, no matter what a city does, it takes staff time. We could be saying we don't want a variance application process because it takes staff time. And you certainly, wend your way down through the list of things and you get to some pretty minor things. And at some point you say, well, for these really minor things, let's try to not have a process that takes staff time, but that's how government runs. That's how corporations run. Everything takes staff time.
Well, I was state manager, so I know that. So. What about windows?
Okay, so our next little change that was proposed was window signs. Currently, window signs are allowed to be hung or affixed to or on the inside of windows. In the proposal, we talked about limiting that to not covering more than 50% of the window. That will create issues, but from a policy perspective, what we would like to hear from the Planning Commission is there a problem with our current standard of no limits on the window signs, or do we want to see that limitation? So that's...
Michael?
I would say, yeah, there's a problem. We had someone here last time talking about the new building at the Schoolhouse Square. And if you've noticed, there have been more and more signs come up. So basically, you've got almost one big wall of billboards. There's not and you could even tell internally the way they've set everything up, that is not what they're perceiving to be an entrance or a well-used entrance. So basically, they're giving this sense to the public as they're driving, walking, whatever by, that this is not an entrance and you have to go around. So I personally would like to see no more than 25% on streets or any other throughways. But certainly unlimited is, we see what we've got.
Has there been any complaints? Do we have anything about signs or about window signs that have been complained about?
Since it's not a violation, we don't get a complaint that it's a violation. So I guess it'd be somebody complaining that they think it's too ugly, which we don't get a lot of those.
No informal discussions that have come up?
Well, I have taken a concern from another planning commission member.
Well, I don't think it's fair that they get to have so much window when I don't have so much window at my business, so I'm gonna make a complaint. No, I'm just kidding.
Wait, what?
As I recall, I thought, and I was looking back, it was changed in 1998. I thought originally it was 50% and then it was increased, but I'm not sure about that.
In my
there's-
time being
there's
here,
always been
it's not had a
100%.
limit.
It was a discussion many, many years ago, and and my recollection was changed, but it's really not that relevant, okay?
Commissioner Whalen.
Well, Nate didn't point at me, but we did have a conversation about these. And the property that we're talking about, that Michael was referring to, what's happening there is it's the new state of the art. It's kind of a Klingon or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but it's not designed really to do anything on the inside of the building as much as it is to add to, in my opinion, the signage that they have, because they all have
Right.
Regular sign rights.
regular sign rights. And I think that it would be appropriate to have some sort of a limit to this. I've heard it discussed, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that also some of that window covering acts as a sunscreen, shade protection thing. But that's been available for years without,
Right.
fishermen call that, if you're over on Tillamook River in the fall and you see these guides, and a lot of them have their whole boat is nothing but advertising. And the fishermen call it boat barf. Well, this is becoming potentially sort of the equivalent. I don't think it looks very attractive for our community, for our business strip, and I think it's appropriate that it's a way, to me, it's a way around the sign code. And I think we need to do something to not discourage business, but to make it reasonable, which is defined by each one of us in 7 different ways. So, but I think we need to limit the window signage. What the percentage is, I certainly wouldn't go over 50%, and maybe less is even more appropriate. But if they're using this with an argument that it's also for sunscreen and shade protection, well, that's available without all that stuff on it, would save them money. So,
And I would point out, last time I checked, I don't go in there that often, but on the parking lot side, which gets really the hottest, most sun of the day, they don't have anything.
that's
So-
true.
So I hear 50% as at least a start.
I was just going to ask one thing that in the current language we proposed, it just said a straight 50% was what we were proposing. I heard Commissioner de Blasi mention specific to street frontage or like public right-of-way sides. I would like to kind of hear you guys' take on that, just from a sense of if we were limiting along public streets versus the interior of a complex or shopping center. That's something just from a wordsmithing, what we can bring back to you. If that's a direction you want us to go, we can definitely try to come up with something that would differentiate between the two.
Personally.
That's a good
Yeah, I clearly, the issues that we have, and Gary and Michael have pointed out, it's on street sides. If it's like on an interior stuff, we're
Okay.
not gonna, driving by, riding by, walking by, we're not gonna really see that.
It probably does need that language, because if, like Michael pointed out, if they took the west side of that business and they take the square footage that's there in glass, that may allow them to actually fill 100% on the east side. So if we're trying to get to 50% of, call it public viewing versus customer viewing, then I think we need to have some, whether it be street side or public.
You could limit that by, I mean, it doesn't need to be transferable. So you could say per side, for example.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And a little interesting rub, I think the place that we're all talking about, you know, the side that faces west also pretty much faces a right of way. It's just not directly, if you see what I'm getting at. It's pretty, it doesn't face it, but because of it is perpendicular, but in that particular example, it's pretty visible from the right of way if you're driving eastbound.
But the definition of a sign is that it's visible from the public right-of-way. And there are a couple of examples that we have kind of squeezed that a little bit to give, to appease the business owner a little bit who has limited, you know, frontage, that sort of thing. So we could do it, I mean, we could do it a number of ways. We could do that's adjacent or facing or whatever. The visible gets a little bit, I'd recommend shying away from the visible from, because today is.
But the adjacent, we could work
Yeah,
with
but,
that.
you know, if you wanted to get to the issue of if it's directly facing the right-of-way, we could certainly craft some language that would say that. And that would give a little more flexibility to these businesses like what we're talking about.
Kyle?
But would what Shannon mentioned in terms of, if we said X% per side, that would achieve that without defining, you know, arterial,
Sure.
main arterial.
And make no distinction between internal or external or just window signs generally.
Yeah,
That'd be simpler.
clean, wouldn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
That, it's just a policy decision.
Yeah. Kyle?
So I have one point to make. You know, I don't think personally that those windows look that bad compared to some of the other windows I've seen. You look at Domino's that had a broken window for forever, and it's now been repaired. There's no plywood on it, but you can see inside it. All you see is crap piled up against the glass. So I would rather see advertisement on there than piles of crap piled up against the
Can't
glass.
really regulate their junk
Well, I
very
know,
well.
but I would rather see a sign on that, and I don't really take offense to any of the ones that we currently have. You look down, you know, across from Burger King, their the tanning place, that's all
Yep.
window, and really, what would you see in there if they didn't have a sign on it? They would either have to have some kind of reflective,
Something you probably don't want to see.
Just white butcher paper.
or you'd see inside,
Right.
see inside the business, and you'd just see another wall on the other side. So, I think we're looking at stuff that really isn't that offensive. At least to me, it's not. I'd rather see a nice looking sign up on a business than a bunch of glass that is just covered over and not taken care of. So, though they spent some money on those signs, they're going to take care of those signs because they serve a purpose. The new restaurant in that building, the new Mexican restaurant, you know, their signs show food and all kinds of stuff, and it doesn't look that, you know, it doesn't look bad. It's kind of, you know, interesting to read how they say things. So I'm just,
like
that's my 2
texting
cents.
while you're driving.
Uh-oh.
So we have another
Rapid
safety
driving.
issue. I mean, you know, you could argue that point.
But it's not changing, you know, more than once every 15 minutes.
Okay.
So, Hirsch?
Jim, sorry.
I just wanted to mention that a month ago, I commented that window signs for me are not an issue. If a window is there and it's got whatever advertising on it, it's just not a big deal to me. but also I understand the design elements and things, and, you know, like the sign, the window signs across from Burger King. There's a particular person laying in a tanning bed, and gee whiz, that's not bad looking. And so you get something else, and the sign could be pretty crummy. And, well, okay, then, if a business doesn't want you to see through the window, what are they going to do? Put up like white butcher paper or something? Or just put up, I don't know, some kind of curtain or whatever? So there's like so many sign issues. There's half a dozen of one, 6 of the other, and I'm amenable to whatever comments the commission wants to make and where we finally end up.
Michael?
Well, what this does is it brings up a bigger issue, you know. If a traditional Main Street, you know, you'd never cover up your windows on a business. You want people to see in your store. Businesses like these new ones, as I said, the internal arrangement, just from driving by, I can see that they're not viewing this as the main entrance. So that's why they want to cover it up, and they will put pizza boxes and tanning beds right up against the window. But if it was reversed, where it was the main entrance, so that another discussion for another night. But,
Yes, yeah.
but this is what we're looking at here is just another step towards creating a main street on River Road.
I don't think we got anywhere great on that one.
In my notes, I have kind of 2 and 2. 2 were okay with it, they didn't care. 2 wanted a 50% or even less reduction, but I didn't hear a consensus really there.
Yeah.
So we're gonna surprise you when we bring it back?
What are your thoughts?
Well, I kind of like the 50% personally. But I understand both points of view and don't take offense with them, but just if you ever, you know where the orthodontist office is on Chemawa. I don't want to look in there. Yes. So, and you have the 2 extremes.
Sure.
You know, so, and I don't want to get in what's art or what, you know, is, you know, I don't want to get into that. So I think I will compromise and let's try the 50%. I don't want to go
Okay.
any lower than 50%.
Okay.
Personally, I do not want to do that
And
personally.
like I just mentioned, I'm okay with 50% too,
Okay.
so
Josh?
it's just not a big issue for me.
Okay. Awesome. Let's move to the next one if you guys are okay
Portables?
with that. So portables and temporaries. It's not 7. So currently, the way our code is structured, it's a 50-foot separation requirement. Technically, it says 1 per lot right now, and there's a 120-day time limit for portable signs. Temporary signs are 1 per lot. It includes wind feather signs or feather flags, and it's also a 120-day time limit. We're proposing to move feather flags into the portable category because, frankly, that's what they are, and it makes more sense. When they got slid into temporaries, it was because it was something done in the very 11th hour on kind of the floor of council, because we didn't used to allow that sign type at all, and it was a fairly new sign type, and people said, no, we want those, we like the way they look. So the big things from policy that we're looking for in this specific category is that what we've proposed language-wise, and frankly, it's been years of listening to the business community who we're enforcing against, who have too many signs or in the wrong location, and hearing the business community say, we need more signage, we need options, things like that. Between that and also kind of the ease of enforcement, what we came up with is we're proposing that each business or storefront would be allowed a portable sign, which is going to include signs like an A-frame or a feather flag or a real estate type sign. So something that's out on the street, right? That's each business is going to get 1 portable sign unlimited duration, no 120-day time limit, because that's a really hard thing for us to track unless we adopted a full-blown permitting process, which we don't think anybody really wants. So, and then with temporary signs, we're narrowing the definition to make them be signs that are affixed to a building. So banners, your corrugated, rigid cardboard materials that they put up that are attached to a building on a temporary basis. And with those, we are planning on leaving the 120-day time limit because we feel that, one, it's called a temporary sign, so it probably should be temporary. So that's really not a big change other than moving the feather flag out. I guess what we want to hear from you guys, we may have had some arguments in-house as to what's appropriate for adequate separation or the appropriate number. 10 feet, it is kind of it is just sort of a picked number. It was 50. So when you go to a lot of the integrated centers where there's multiple storefronts, it's a major problem for people to get signage. Yes, Gary?
Last month, there was a gentleman here from, I think it's called Kaiser Mart.
Yep.
And he was part of where
Yes.
this conversation came from or went to, I think. Because they've got 8 or 9 or 10 businesses in there,
Correct.
but they probably don't have 100 feet or 80 feet, whatever that would be, for them to each have a temporary sign.
Right.
So can businesses be combined if
Content neutrality, absolutely they could. I mean, so what we're proposing is a 10-foot separation, 5 feet off of property lines, 6 square feet, or if it's a feather flag, it can actually be 16 because it's a little different shape, different dynamic. What we're wanting to get from you guys is, are we hitting that at the right spot at a 10-foot separation? Should we be keeping the 50-foot? Should we decrease it down and not have a separation? And I guess, obviously, the impact of what we're proposing is that theoretically it could result in more portable signs out on our street front. I mean, it absolutely could, because right now they theoretically should be limited to 1 every 50 feet. And so that's really, I think, the crux of what we need your guys' input on is.
And the proposal is 1 per storefront.
Right.
Physical location. The reason we're choosing that is several businesses, many businesses have several businesses under an umbrella business kind of thing. So the intent is we count the number of storefronts. And if there are, like Kaiser Mart's instance, there are, I think, I can't remember, 10 businesses in that location. There would be 10 signs, maximum. That will probably be more signs than is currently there now because of our 50-foot spacing. And we're also proposing basically that there be no time. Right now there's a 120-day limit. That 120-day limit is very difficult to enforce. We don't have a stopwatch. We don't have a permit. It's, oh, there's a sign. How long's that been there? I don't know. So the impact of this decision is probably more signs, more temporary signs along River Road, hence my stress. However, it's more honest and it's, I think, more fair to businesses like Kaiser Mart. Who, his particular case is particularly egregious. But, so there you have it.
Well, we do have more businesses along River Road than we did when the city was formed.
Yeah,
And some of the early decisions on signs, we have more. So,
and signs back in the early days were a mess. It was,
yeah,
it was a nightmare. And we don't want to go back to those days. So,
but fairness is also important too. Commissioner Jacks?
I guess in terms of portable signs, a 10-foot separation to me seems too narrow, or would allow too many signs, and maybe 50 feet is too much of a separation. So I'd prefer to have the 10-foot increased. I don't know to what level, but if you're gonna walk 3 steps, it's, kind of bigger striding steps, 3 feet per step, well, that's about 10 feet. And depending on how many storefronts there are, boy, you could have feather flag after feather flag, just one after another, and it starts looking like a circus or a state fair or something. And so I'm more concerned about this kind of signage than window signage.
So choose a number.
Would 20 feet?
30 feet. 28.75 feet.
That's as good a science as anything else we're doing.
Well, let's put it in the metric system.
No.
15,
Then nobody will
15,
know.
about 15 meters, that's, like 45 feet, so it's almost 50, but I don't know, something in the 20 to 30 foot range. Then the other commissioners can chime in.
20, I hear 220, not 225, but 225s over here.
I'll join that group.
Okay. I think it's fair to have more signage for these businesses. I think the testimony last month was pretty clear from the Kaiser Mart that their issues, and there may be some others, but the description of a carnival with the flags, we don't want that either, and maybe 25 feet. Sounds better.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can work with that. I think that's, if you guys don't have anything else, I think that gives us enough to go back to the drawing board. Oh, yes, sorry.
Well, I don't know if we're done with portable and still want to talk about temporary.
Oh, okay.
I just was wondering, is there a way where we can limit the materials that just would have a shelf life, or?
So there is actually some language in there now, and we definitely can do that. That's kind of that's in my notes from last meeting. I can't remember who had talked about that, but that they would be kept in good repair. Actually, it might have been Jonathan's testimony. So that is in my notes to kind of look and try to figure out when we bring back to you something that could strengthen some language for the materials that they're made of. That they're weather resistant, some other communities, because we looked at a lot of sign codes, and some other communities, everybody kind of looks at it a little differently. But yes, definitely, we don't want to see the ratty paper signs or things like that.
Yeah, I'm actually advocating the opposite.
Okay.
Because if no one's doing the clock,
Mm-hmm.
and we're saying it's a 120-day time frame, it would just naturally decay.
Disintegrate?
Yeah, but that's, again, back to making our community look nice. Here's this decaying sign.
Honestly, these are business owners. These are business properties that they're not going to have trash hanging on the side of their building.
Right.
So that may be something to actually consider, is if it's made out of temporary materials, your time frame is built in pretty good. I mean, it's just something to consider.
Okay. Commissioner Jacks.
Just a comment about these are business owners and they're concerned about appearance. It may be that there aren't enough business owners that are concerned enough about appearance of their buildings and landscaping where there's weeds rampant, not just in a part of the year, but all throughout the growing season. So I'm thinking that some business owners might not worry too much about a ratty temporary sign because they don't seem to worry about their landscaping, the paint on their buildings, just the general appearance of their entire property.
Is that enough on portable signs and stuff? Let's go on to the hot one, electronic message.
Did I hear consensus on
20 feet for 5 feet for portable. I didn't hear much consensus on temporary.
on temporary sign? Is the proposal
To maintain
to basically maintain the existing language?
but you mentioned that you were doing some research on the materials.
Yep. Okay.
But it was to strengthen the, it was opposite of what?
I mean, if we have the time limit because of the material type and still have a guidance of how the sign should look,
Yeah.
shouldn't that kind of cover?
And they generally are larger signs, so they're more noticeable. They're easier to enforce the time frame on those.
Okay. Okay. Oh, what we've all been waiting for, electronic message signs. Obviously, we had the, at least what these guys are waiting for. Man, how mean is that? We should have just put that one first.
Yeah. Sorry.
I just went in order of how they came in the code, really. Okay, so clearly we had testimony tonight.
And
Last week as well. The current proposal we came with was once every 60 seconds. There are a couple things that I wanted to kind of clarify. There really is no national standard for EMCs. Now, there's a lot of standards driven by traffic safety and the Federal Highway Administration, which generally are more in the 3 and 4 second category range, just as far as safety goes. And there's also a lot of studies out there that talk about how frequent or how long a message has to be there for our brains to retain the understanding of a message. But we actually went and we've looked at a lot of the different codes around Oregon, and frankly, cities are all over the board. What is very accurate is that the city of Salem for many years now has had an 8-second standard for most of their heavier commercial zones. But here's what I want to make sure planning commissioners understand the difference between Kaiser and Salem. And big caveat, I don't actually have a dog in the fight for the electronic message centers one way or the other. But I want to make sure you're informed and you're educated on what the rules are in our city and in other cities. Because in the city of Salem currently, it is 8 seconds in most of their commercial and industrial zones. But the city of Salem has way more zones than the city of Kaiser has across the board. They have a ton more overlay districts, whereas in Kaiser, and their sign code is completely connected to the zoning designations of properties. Ours is designated to the uses of properties, where it's commercial uses versus semi-public uses versus public uses, non-commercial, and residential uses. So we're actually proposing to even the playing field with electronic message centers and say, hey, whether or not you're advertising at the school or at the fire district or at Willamette Valley Bank, who testified here earlier, we're going to let you do a message once every 60 seconds. In Salem's case, if you are in any of the residential zones, in the commercial office zone, in the neighborhood commercial zone, the neighborhood center mixed use zone, or the Fairview mixed use zone, then you can only change your frequency once every hour for an EMC. And those are more of because they have so many more overlay districts, it's not your classic downtown or Lancaster or any of that, which is the more classic commercial, but these are their different mixed use zones, their neighborhood nodes, things like that. So they do differentiate with those. We are proposing that we wouldn't differentiate with ours because frankly our city is structured in a very different method. We're much more lineal, right? I mean, it's all kind of around River, Shamawa, Lock Haven.
And none of our commercial is very far away from residential.
Right. So that's kind of what we've come with. The couple things that I really wanted policy direction on, Salem was or is taking their sign code to their council. Actually, I think it might have just happened. I can't remember. It hasn't been adopted yet, but I have a draft of all of their language that I've kind of been looking at. We talked about this last meeting, the illumination factor that they're going to change to. We as staff would like to kind of copy them on that. So there's a consistency in the illumination standards. And if Planning Commission is comfortable with that, we ultimately are hoping that we'll have an answer on which direction they lean so we can bring that language back to you guys for consideration. The big thing from a true kind of policy implication that we wanted to hear tonight on these is the duration discussion. Obviously, we've heard a lot of testimony for a lower number than we're proposing. Again, our current is 15 minutes for those commercial uses, and it's been once every 24 hours for the public and the semi-public uses. So for fire district, for McNary High School, for those type of uses, it's been only once every 24 hours since we made EMCs allowed. And as Jim testified or talked last week, I guess it used to be we didn't even allow these at all, right? It was 2008 that we started allowing EMCs, I think, at all in the city. So yeah, I think that's kind of what we want to hear from you guys, is where we're at on the duration and how you want us to look at that.
And Shane mentioned it, cities are all over the board, but there are some major cities that still prohibit EMCs. City of Bend prohibits EMCs. There are some that go down to the 8 seconds. So it's a truly is a policy choice that you have. So
Well, clearly, the 15-minute is not really good. Based on our testimony, it's not helping. I didn't realize that McNary and Whitaker and those places had a different standard. And that must mean that in Salem, South Salem, McKay have a different standard too than the 8 seconds.
It may be, I don't know what all those properties are zoned, Hirsch, so it is all connected to the underlying zoning designation
Because,
there.
you know, I know it was a number of years ago, but it was so exciting in this town when all the commercial billboards and the public billboards were celebrating McNary's football championship. And as testified tonight, the Willamette Valley Bank, their stuff, and other businesses too. And I want them to be able to do that and still advertise their business. I don't know about 8 seconds versus 60 seconds. I'm not an electrical engineer, but clearly we have to move away from the 15. That's, you know, I could be convinced either way. Commissioner Jacks.
Well, I guess I agree too. 15 minutes seems long, and it's been a good trial for, I guess it was 2008. I don't know when the first electronic message center sign went in.
in
But,
2008.
Right, yeah. And so, I guess going back to last month's meeting, thought any talk about an 8 seconds national standard. Well, how could that be out of the, I don't know what, 50,000 or 100,000 cities in the country and counties? Did somebody even inventory 10% or 1% of those and come up with the 8 second standard? So I assumed that the 8 second standard is just whatever somebody wanted to say, so they said it and described it as a national standard without any proof of any kind to support their statement. But I don't know if 8 seconds is the right number, or 10 seconds, or 15 seconds, or 60 seconds. So I think with the public signs, they probably, regardless of what the timing is, they're probably not going to be flipping over that quick. A commercial business might have 100 different products, and so every few seconds they want another product on their sign. But for the school, I don't think they've got more than a few events to have on.
Well, like McNary High School, one evening they could have 6 or 7 events, from volleyball to a football game to a prom, whatever, PTA meetings. So, you know, not like a business, like you said,
Yeah,
but
and so-
they could utilize it.
Well,
for
yeah,
sure.
and I'm saying that they should not have a separate standard.
Right.
And so then the question is, what should the standard be for everybody that has an electronic sign? So I'm certainly flexible. I guess I wouldn't mind even 8 seconds, but I don't want somebody to say, oh yeah, the Commissioner Jacks is supporting 8 seconds because it's a national standard, because to me that's, for lack of a better term, a ridiculous statement to say there's an 8 second standard.
Well, there is an 8 second standard on the bull. Commissioner.
So the last time we talked about this, I had suggested a 2-minute, so 120-second. And I did a little research. So I came up with, for a pedestrian, an average walking speed of 3.1 miles per hour. And that's 270 feet per minute. And that this one website I saw said a 4-inch sign, a 4-inch lettering on a sign can be viewed from a maximum distance of 150 feet. I imagine these EMCs are about 4, maybe 6 inches. So 6 inches is a little bit further.
Well, I can,
We have even bigger ones than that.
Well, because they can. Generally, and that's one of the things that we've seen with the EMCs as they become more cost effective and the technology gets better and it gets cheaper, they are more effective signs. I mean, I think Willamette Valley Bank might have been our first EMC that we processed. And, you know, you can kind of tell as the signs along River Road, the newer ones tend to be crisper and a little easier to read. I think they're just, there's just, you know, different technology. So a lot of them truly can be infinitely adjusted from very fine text to very large text. So it is a hard, I mean, there's not a hard, fast number, but.
So, which, obviously the bigger, the farther you can see. So I would think, 60 seconds, even with the recommendation, someone going, it's not always someone going down at 35, a lot of times 40 miles down River Road. They're not the only viewers of these things. And, there's a lot of people who don't want to see flashing signs, even if it's words, flashing signs so frequently. And I think, if we have the uniformity across the city, that's fine. Certainly, there shouldn't be a bias towards one sign over another. But to say that you have to have such rapid turnover on a sign, that just seems, I just don't see the need for that.
Commissioner Whalen.
Thank you. I appreciate the 4 people that testified tonight, and Carlos and Jonathan are still here. Thank you for hanging in there. I agree, 15 minutes, I think, is inefficient for a return on the investment to the users of the sign and what they're trying to, information they're trying to get to their potential customers. And 8 seconds, I kind of agree with Jim. I'm not sure how you could substantiate that. And it was interesting to hear that Salem is done by zones. I was not aware of that. Because I think one of our challenges here is to get a balance between safety and limiting or minimizing distractions that can come with both. And I don't know how you measure that. Somebody much smarter than me. But I know since this came up a month ago, as I've traveled through different parts of town, and again, primarily Salem, my observation has been, just like when I'm stopped at a stop sign or something, or a stop light rather than a stop sign, and counting in my head, and I can count to 60.
Wow.
That seems to be about the turnover for most of the signs that I'm seeing in Salem, in Staten. I just came back from a trip through all the way up to Joseph, and even Elgin and Imbler have electronic signs.
Oh, yes, they do.
You know.
Yes, they do.
So I think a minute or maybe a small amount of time over that is going to be a good balance. It's going to help the merchant who's trying to get a message out to his customers or potential customers without being a distraction and maybe compromising safety from the distraction we get as I'm driving down the street and trying to read this thing. Because, so I'm good with staff recommendation or whatever this group falls on.
Jim?
One of the things that a lot of people think about when they're talking about the timing of the display is one sign, and it's up for whatever amount of time. But when you're driving down a street, you're not looking at one sign, and over time, virtually every business along River Road or wherever our commercial areas are in the city, they will have electronic message center signs. And so as you're driving along, you're looking at one sign, but you can see down the perspective all the other signs. And if you have a, what have we got now, 15 minutes? So if each sign that you can see, and I don't know what, maybe there's 10 or 20 or something in that range, well, if each one is changing every 15 minutes, okay, that's every 15 minutes. But if it changes every 2 seconds, as you're driving down, this sign changes 2 seconds. And in your view, there's another sign and another. There's 10 or 20 signs in your view. And if they're all changing every 2 seconds, it's just a blinky, 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 blinky kind of a perspective view that you have. So kind of like everybody, I don't know if it's 8 seconds or 15 seconds or a minute or whatever, but I guess a minute seems long to me. And I don't know.
I'm just, like you, Jim, I don't know what's the right time is from both. I think I'm going to, my point of view at this point is acquiesce to the staff 60. Kyle?
So, as a business owner on River Road, I would, if I was to spend the money on a sign like that, I'd want to show as much as, get as much information out there as I could. So personally, for me, I would, I think the 8 seconds has been shown to not be a safety issue, and so I think that would be my biggest concern is if somebody could say, oh yeah, the 8 seconds is unsafe because, it's moving too fast, then I would be, wanting to move it up a little bit. But, the 8 seconds seems to work for the signs that I've advertised on in Salem. And I've watched, believe me, when I spend that kind of money on one of those billboards, I go and look at every one of those billboards and make sure I'm getting my time because they cost me a fortune. So, and I haven't done that for a few years, but I've done every sign in Salem. I have had an advertisement on one of their digital signs. So I want to get as much out of it as I can. And so the 8 seconds to me seems to work on all the stuff that I've paid for. And so I'm happy with that number.
Yeah, yeah. Because I personally am not, the only thing I'm against is the 15 minutes. Anything in between, no. Jim?
Just to try to narrow things down a little bit, certainly the 15 I think is too long now that we've had several years of experience with that. And even a minute seems to be long to me because as you're driving down whatever street it is, a commercial street that would have these kinds of signs, and even though your perspective might let you see 10 of them, if they're each changing 1 minute and 1 minute or whatever, I don't know, it just seems as though a minute is a long time to have a message up.
No,
And even if you're at a stoplight and the sign is there, you only need a few seconds to see it, read it, really understand it, and get it in your mind. And so I'm frankly somewhere less than a minute, and I'm more in the category of 15 seconds to 30 seconds.
Michael?
Well, what you had said before, Jim, I thought was correct, that we are going to see more and more of these. And so even though, even at 15 seconds, you're having time to read these things and you're having multiple things, that cascade of signs blinking and changing, I think, aesthetically, I think that's an issue we have to consider.
A silly question. If we come up with a consensus of a time and standards research say, oh, they made a mistake, say a traffic safety study by,
Sure.
say, oh, this is causing, can we change that?
I mean, I would say yes, and I would
'Cause
say
there's no studies in the material
correct.
that I read.
No, and
is like Kyle said, there's nothing that says if you put it this, you're going to have a pile up here.
Yeah, no, the studies that are out there for safety, and that's one of the things that we really do want to make sure as staff, our recommendation is not one based on traffic safety. That's not our concern with the EMCs, because there is study after study after study. Now, Commissioner Jacks points out some really fun things. When you look at studies, you should always look at who funds those studies. But there is study after study after study that is not going to support a 15-minute or a 1-minute or a 30-second or even a 15-second change as being a traffic safety related issue based on everything that I've seen out of there's a lot of studies out there, and all of them put it down. And even our state, ODOT, for the signs they use for their big digital display signs, that are advertising things like road work and accidents ahead. Their engineers are putting those signs that I think it's in that 3 and 4 second category. And it's also a calculus of how large the lettering is so people can read it, because there's a ton of new studies with the advent of texting with distracted driving studies that have been done. And with the distracted driving studies, 4 seconds is kind of the new number that everybody's using, as that is kind of the number that you look away and are distracted. When it goes above that you are getting into accidents. We're seeing accidents increase. So the question to you guys really isn't one of safety, at least from a staff perspective. We're not looking at it from safety. We're looking at it that we've issued these conditional use permits since 2008, and every time we do it, the companies get really upset with us when I have to send them a letter or call them and go, hey, you can't have a flashing sign. I know you paid for a conditional use permit, but read your conditions. And so, we feel that it's appropriate to reduce it, but to how far, it really is a thing of, as Michael said, it's what it looks like. It's how you want it to look in your community.
And going to your question, I believe, yes, there is a concern, because the reason you don't see more of them now is because the time limit is what it is. If you lower that to, for example, 8 seconds, and somebody buys a sign based on the fact that they can show a message every 8 seconds, and you decide later that 8 seconds is maybe not what we wanted aesthetically on River Road, you will have significant opposition from somebody who bought a sign based on an 8-second period.
So we have to deal with both message content and time content to avoid going to Washington, D.C., right?
I think it'd be much more local than Washington.
Okay.
I'm looking around. I appreciate what Kyle says, but I'm concerned that we can always go lower, right? Okay.
And we are just making a recommendation to
Right.
council, and this is going to fall in their lap.
Yeah, there's other considerations
So,
that they apply.
With all due respect to Council President Parsons, we can make a recommendation, and it still gets punted downstream, or upstream, upriver.
I'm inclined to stay with staff right now,
With,
60.
I'm good with that.
That's okay.
But
Last page. We made it to the last page. Okay, so the first one, we don't even really need to talk about it. It was a pretty simple change. Secondary frontage signs are currently allowed in integrated centers. There's kind of, we think, a little bit of an oversight that doesn't allow them for standalone businesses. We're proposing to lift the language and mirror it so it's equal across the board. Obviously, there would be the option to make no change there, but I think in the sake of equity, we are recommending we make that change. And then the very last category, unless there's major pauses on the secondary frontage piece, is the grand opening / special occasion signs. And this was born out of a couple of reasons, as we alluded to before. This is the vehicle that would allow that larger commercial real estate sign, which, if other languages come up with, maybe that negates that second type of permit. But what we've proposed is two distinct types of permits. One that would hinge around, well, what we've heard from the business community and the chamber is that there's no way to advertise for a grand opening. There's no way to advertise for a big sidewalk sale or a special event. And so this would give a vehicle and an ability, such as we do for temporary businesses that come and locate in a parking lot for a weekend or a month at a time. It would give us a way to regulate in a pretty simple way, but it would also give a business owner a way to come and say, hey, we're having a big grand opening or a reopening because we've done a big remodel or whatever. And what we're proposing is that we basically say you can put up big banners and all kinds of portable signs. So that's the first type of permit. We are proposing to limit it to a 2-week time period because really how long can a grand opening last? So we're saying a 2-week time period and that you can do 2 events a year as long as there's at least a 30-day separation between them. So if a business wants to spend the money and the time to buy big signs to advertise their, twice yearly sale or whatever, they can do that by permit process only. I guess what we're looking for policy to direction from you guys is one, do you want to do it at all or just not have it at all and it stays the way it is? We feel it's responding to the business community's desire to have something a little bit more and special. And if it is appropriate, the other thing we wanted to get from you guys is right now the way it's proposed is there really are no sideboards on it. And when Waremart by Winco wants to come in and do their grand opening, if they want to have a massive banner and 60 feather flags and portable signs all over the place, what we're saying with this language is if they come and get a permit for 2 weeks, they'll be able to do it. Well, when that 2 weeks is up, they got to be done or we're writing them a ticket. But for 2 weeks, they'd be able to do that. And so I guess we're looking for some direction from you guys, or if you want sideboards on it, what would those appropriate sideboards be? We kind of threw a couple of ideas out there for you to consider. Maybe a maximum overall banner size. Some of the businesses and other jurisdictions we've seen, they've basically matched what's allowed as permanent signage as a way to allow larger banners. They can have a banner up to the same size as permanent signage would be allowed, or just listing a specific square footage. Our banner size outright is 16 square feet. It's super tiny. Most places are a lot larger than that, frankly. And then the other thing is you could cap the total number of signs. You could pick a number. With that special event, they could get 10 additional signs or 20 or 5 or however many you wanted to do. Or you could just make it subject to the same spacing requirements that you choose to adopt in the other section for portable signs. So like 10 feet, although now we're looking at 25 feet. So those were sort of the things we wanted to get from you guys, if it's a good idea, and then if you want sideboards and what those might be.
I think it's a good idea to let businesses have
Okay.
special occasions. It's so far your definition and the separation twice a year. Good. About the equipment, that's another.
Right.
And using Waremart as an example, well, yeah, that's a big deal.
And when you have a sign like that, in the case of the business you reference, they would probably need to be anchored to the new trees. Be attached.
Getting late, isn't
I'm going to defer to Nate.
So the good news in this category is this is truly very temporary. And if you don't like it, you can change this one because they literally go away after 2 weeks. And everything is a new thing. So, and I also wrestled with this one too. But so the proposal is, you know what? You have a grand opening, you come in, you get a permit, and knock yourself out. And if we don't like it, then it goes away. Literally, it goes away, and we will be with a stopwatch because of the permit. And if we don't like it, we can always come back from that.
Kyle?
So, on my property, I have a big sign, and if I wanted to do an open house or a, some kind of special event, I could drape a vinyl sign over top of my existing sign and still be within code.
Absolutely.
So why can't everybody else do that on their existing signs
Well,
if
they
they
could,
want?
they could. Yeah, because generally, we've seen that's not enough.
And I really do. I mean, Kyle, I think it's the nature of the business, right? I mean, Bonaventure is a great example. They had a big grand opening event. They had a barbecue that kind of the public was invited to, and they had a big row of feather flags and a giant, like 75 square foot grand opening banner on the building. So that's something that by our sign code right now, there's no provision to allow that for any business.
And
But
so we ended up giving them a 2-week notice. Remove their non-compliant signs.
Jim?
So the signage that could be used would include these things that have a forced air fan at the bottom, and it's a fabric thing that kind of...
currently, no. The way that we've proposed the language, no. Although that would be something that if you guys wanted to do that, we would have to craft some language. Right now, tethered signs, movable signs, anything that has motion associated with it, they're prohibited signs. What the permit will allow is unlimited temporary and or portable signs. So just the ones that are already defined. So more feather flags, more A-frames, more yard type signs, more banners and larger banners. So that's the way it's proposed.
Well, I guess if it's an unlimited number, then we definitely need a time frame, and a couple of weeks, that's probably longer than I would want to see a property with excessive signage, but if 2 weeks works, then 2 weeks is okay.
So, did you guys notice that a sign has been modified in lieu of this code change on River Road? Across from me, a sign had been updated to new flashing lights so that they wouldn't have to do that if we changed things down the road. So
I saw a sign company out there, but I haven't been by since.
they've got new faces and new lighting that go around.
We'll talk after.
I haven't talked to them, but I happened to notice it when it went up because it was.
Really? Well, no lady has sung yet, so.
So I'm hearing everybody's kind of agreeing with, Michael, sorry.
One question, so I'm not sure, so you got the two types of permits that still would go forward both?
Sorry. Yeah, the only exception is so that second type of permit, earlier in the night, yeah, it was a long time ago, when we were talking about the real estate signs, because really the reason that second type of permit is there, the only reason is that that's my creative way of coming up with a way for a commercial real estate sign of 16 square feet to be allowed somehow. But if we can craft language to do that a different way, then I would propose that we would just eliminate that second time of permit altogether. If we can't find a way to craft that language with Shannon's blessing, then maybe we leave that in as a workaround.
And Jim's going to help us with that.
Yeah, so it's really all up to Jim and Shannon.
Commissioner Whalen.
Could we go back to the electronic signs again,
Right,
please?
so let's finish with this one first.
Okay, sorry.
Do we have kind of consensus that celebration? Yeah.
Give it a try.
Yeah. The part that I like is the 30-day break, because we've seen all over,
And only 2 a year.
in 2 year, the continuous garage sale things and things like that, so.
Okay.
Did
I
you
think
want
I saw all heads
to
nod.
revisit?
Yeah, so. So the electronic sign timing we're talking about, will that also apply to some ones we talked about, like Kaiser Fire District, McNary High School, Whitaker? They will be in that same time frame.
Yeah, the recommendation
Yes.
is all to 1 minute.
Okay,
Fire district, schools.
good. I didn't want to exclude them because they do a lot of
Sure.
public service type
public
stuff.
service, yeah.
Right, yeah. The only difference would be, Gary, is the way that it's written right now is that if it's adjacent to residential properties, technically that EMC should be turned off at 11 p.m. I think it's 11 p.m. The illumination is supposed to be turned off. So, which doesn't apply to Kaiser Fire and arguably applies to McNary maybe. But yeah, well, they don't have them currently, but yes, the grade schools in neighborhoods, if they choose to go to an EMC, that will be something our illumination standards for those types, actually for any signs in those zones, they're supposed to be turned off at night. So anyway.
Thank you.
Anything more?
I think we have spoken our piece.
Do you think the best methodology is to close the hearing at this time?
Right.
And
Right. And then direct staff to come back.
with-
Once staff comes back to the recommendation, we'd love it to be able to run it past our members again for feedback since some things got tweaked tonight. But my understanding is if the public hearing is closed, then we'll have that opportunity.
You would have the opportunity at the council level.
does that help, Jonathan?
We can live in that world.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing on text amendment section 2.308 signs. I don't know if there's a need to go into any great deliberations per se.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
We don't, unless Nate wants, I don't think that we need any particular motion at this stage. We're looking for direction and we have that direction. We'll come back with
You
something.
will come
after.
back.
Yeah, we will be coming back with something.
Shall return.
Yeah, we shall return.
Not done yet.
Okay. With that, moving on then. New old business, staff report.
The new business is we're working through this sign code and it's driving me crazy. Yeah, so we just signed our interlocal agreement. It's an interlocal agreement, right? With the education outreach grant. So that has been done. We can now then begin to start work on the project, at least scheduling it. And we anticipate that will come back to us all, and I'm looking both to the Planning Commission and to our council liaison, that we will be involved in this effort. It's a very specific and a very limited, it's a one meeting kind of
Thanks,
of
Jonathan.
thing.
I'm not gone yet.
Oh, okay.
He misses us.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, we said that already. So the good news is it's not a ton of involvement on your part. It's more of an involvement of staff coordinating with the consultant, preparing for this this outreach effort. And what it's anticipated to be is like an expanded work session with both the Planning Commission, the council, and invited stakeholders. And that's focused on basically how other communities have dealt with their issues of limited land supply for their growth. So that will be after the first of the year. We are very close on getting an IGA on the other grant. And that, though Shannon has not seen a draft yet to review, and that's on our Kaiser revitalization plan. looking at all of our area plans and seeing where the opportunities are to increase flexibility, increase multi-use kinds of approaches, and basically squeeze every last responsible bit of growth that we can in our commercial areas. So, and that, we're not through the process just yet, but we're getting close. At some point, somebody's going to throw something at me when I say that, but that's what I'm told. We signed that thing, yeah. So coming up at Monday's council meeting, and maybe I should leave this for our council liaison.
I won't be here.
Oh, jeepers. Okay, well then I'll have to step in.
I'm going to be in Europe, remember?
So we have yeah, that's right. I still need your itinerary. So we have the Area B order that.
That's the theater area.
The Area B where the proposed theater is. And that is on the council agenda. We also have the landscaping work that you did, which includes that 1% provision. And we also have the Area A proposed master plan amendment, which is basically going to allow Kaiser Permanente to have a mirror facility. Two buildings instead of one. No, the construction that is there now is a retail building. It's Cafe Yum, and I don't think we've heard.
Some other restaurant, was it?
Is it?
Yeah, there's 2 restaurants and then Kaiser Permanente.
We haven't heard the second restaurant.
It said the name, they had, Kaiser Times had their name and it was like,
That's the one over by Cost Plus. Yeah, Hop Jacks is over
Oh,
by
Hop
Cost Plus World Market. And,
oh, and then there's another one?
Chipotle.
Yeah.
Where the Cafe Yum is, it's a 2-tenant building. I don't think we know
we don't know
who
who
the
the
other
other tenant is. Oh,
We haven't seen the
Permit.
tenant improvement permit for that yet. And as you know, the hotel is moving right along, which is kind of interesting to see. Mostly wood construction building of multi-stories.
Smaller capacity than what was originally planned.
No, no. It looks small.
It is.
Doesn't it? Yeah. I know, that's when it started coming out of the ground, I'm like, really? That's it? In my mind, I had something
They have
much
80
bigger.
rooms, but they didn't tell us how small the rooms might be, so.
Yes.
Anyway, so I think that's all I've got for you tonight.
Council liaison.
well, since we had the last meeting, we had this thing called a solar eclipse.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that's right. And down at Kaiser Rapids Park, we held an event down there over the weekend. It was a very successful event. And there was a lot of people from around the world there, and they came for one purpose, and that was to see the solar eclipse. So they were nice, very nice campers, very respectful of our neighbors and respectful of our park. They left it cleaner, I think, than probably when they got there. So it was absolutely wonderful. I think quiet time, you could have heard a pin drop. It was very, very nice out there. So, and we raised we raised quite a few funds. I don't have a final tally yet, but I'll let you know. So that council meeting, that particular evening, I was very tired, not really sure that we accomplished very much. But we did direct staff to come back with the 1%, which we're gonna hear on Monday night. And we did talk about the landscaping. So, and they're coming back with that also on Monday night, and I won't be there. So. But other than that, I will be gone for the next 2 weeks, but I'll see you next month.
Thank you very much for chairing the Eclipse Committee, because that was a lot of work on your part, so thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Council Representative Josh? He can't do it. And I am going to be gone also. Anybody else? For the
Last hurrah, Jim, last hurrah.
Jim? This Monday.
This Monday, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is my last meeting as far as I know. However, I did see an email late this afternoon that one of our members is resigning,
Yes.
and so we have a vacancy that's this position that's going to be
Yeah.
filled. And so we've got a second vacancy now as of today. So maybe if I were to stay on through midnight of the 18th,
You would,
I could talk to the council.
yes.
Because it was
So decreed.
And I could just say anything I want because.
Actually, Commissioner Jacks, your term doesn't end until the end of the month.
End of the month.
End of the month.
You're,
September 30. Yeah, it's odd. It's not through the last meeting, so.
I'll see if I can remember the 18th, because one time I know I totally forgot about it, and it was like Thursday of that week, so I remembered that the previous Monday.
And that means Nate would have to give the report if you weren't there and I weren't there.
You could request the city reporter to send him a reminder or something.
yeah.
Maybe,
Well, thank you, Jim.
well, okay, when the limousine arrives, I'll know to get in and it'll take me here.
Yeah.
Monday night, okay.
Without seeing anything else, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.